Okay, so in day 2, we're actually going to dive in and start writing our first piece of code concerning forms. So we're actually going to start creating them, and our learning targets for today are that we can identify and apply the different HTML tags that create a web page form, that we can describe the ways data is sent in a form in name-value pairs. So we'll talk about the name and the value attributes that are pretty important. And then we can create a web page using appropriate HTML tags and attributes that will actually create a form. So first we have to talk about some of the key HTML tags that are used to create forms. Some we've talked about, some we have not. But first we've talked through the field set tags. We've talked through the form tags being around everything that needs to be processed like a form. The input tags, we've talked through the types of controls that use the input tags. The legends are used with the field set. Then we have the select and the text area tags that are used to create those types of input choices, as well as the option tag that pairs with the select tag. So these are the tags we're going to use over the next few days to actually start creating our first forms. So to dive in and talk about this form tag a little bit further, we use the form tag around everything that needs to be processed like a form. If you don't use it, your web page will not actually display a form and will not be able to process that form. So all of your input controls need to go inside of your form tags. And then as we mentioned yesterday when we talked through all those different input controls, that these are used and created using the attributes of different HTML tags or their own unique tags like the text area tag or the select tag. And there's one input control that needs to be, like a tag will need to be used every single time you want to create a new input control. And then as we talked about yesterday, the text area boxes and the selection controls, those both use their own tags. And then these 6 down below are all going to use that input tag. And then we'll use the type attribute within the input tag to designate which type of input control we're going to use. So these are all of the things that we've actually talked through already, except for these first 3 with the form. We'll talk through those in a little bit. But yesterday we talked through all of these different attributes that could be used within the input tag, the type being the most important because it decides what type of input control you are creating. But then the rest of these allow you to kind of specialize each individual input control. Then we also talked through these, the select tags, as well as the option tags, as well as those text area tags that pair up with them. So we'll be talking through these in more detail today as we actually begin to code. So we're actually going to start by creating a form on a web page. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go to my classroom website, and you're going to go to Unit 6, scroll down to Lesson 2, and here is actually a file for you to download. So I want you to download that orderform.htm file, save it in an appropriate folder for Unit 6 because this is the one file that we will be working with. And then I want you to open it up into Notepad++. So this is what you should see in front of you once you have it downloaded. So I'd go ahead, pause the video, download this file, and then we're actually going to start adding more specific details to this file. So this is what you should see if you run this right now. It just shows up as a form that would be filled in by hand. And we're going to update it to look like this. So it's going to have 3 form groupings of personal information about your order and additional comments. And then we're going to use all the different types of input controls that we've discussed so far throughout this unit. So text boxes, check boxes, radio buttons, everything like that, we are actually going to use throughout this particular project. So what I'd like you to do is to start, we're going to input those form tags, and these need to be around everything that needs to be contained in the form. So if I look in here, I notice, okay, this first part is just the order form title that doesn't need to be contained in the order form. Neither does this chunk right here, which talks about, you know, the basics for the website and how to email and ask questions. But where the name part starts, that's where my form actually starts. So I'm going to incorporate a form tag here, and then I'm going to input everything, or there you go, tab everything in. And then I actually don't need it down here. I'm going to close off my form after this paragraph tag. So I'm just putting my form tags around what actually needs to be contained in my form. That's what I'm adding in right there. So I'm going to insert my form tags around everything that needs to be processed like a form. And remember, this is used to designate the part of your page that needs to be contained in a form. Then from here, we need to add some key attributes to our form tags. The first is called the action attribute. So we're actually going to add that in right now, and every single form needs an action. So here it says it specifies the action to be taken when the form is submitted. And essentially there are two ways that we can, or two things that we can do when a form is submitted. One, we can send an email to an email address with name value pairs, which isn't the most efficient way to do this, but it's functional and it's what we'll use in this project because we haven't actually accessed the database yet. The second option, the better option, the more efficient option, is to send this information to a database. And if you take a database course in the future, you could actually tie together your forms with a database and send the information that's entered into that database to then be utilized. However, for this class, we're just going to focus on the email address option. So this is essentially what happens when the information is processed. Now, remember, we can send it to a database. It just basically requires you to use something that is beyond the knowledge that you'll obtain in this course. So the second method that we'll need to use is the second attribute we'll need to use is called the method attribute. So here I'm going to type in method because this is something I will also need. Now it specifies the manner in which the data is entered in the form and is sent to the server to be processed. And there are two primary methods, the get method and the post method. And so I'm going to give a slide to both. So the get method sends the name value pairs of data to the URL indicated in the action attribute. So whatever is here, the get method sends to that URL. It then adds the information to the end of the URL's file. So what will happen is it will send that data and it will actually just put it at the very, very end of the URL. Now that's fine, but the problem is if the server limits the size of your URL, then it can truncate and cut it off, and that information can disappear. Now the post method, what this method does instead, and what's preferred by most programmers, is it sends a separate data file with what are called name value pairs. So instead of just adding it onto the end of the URL, it basically sends this information as name value pairs to a URL or an email address. And so that's most likely what we're going to be using because it will not risk, the too long URL being truncated and important data being lost. So with that being said, you should have this all inserted. Now we're now going to add in the action and the method. So as I said, the method is always going to be post because that will send an email, an actual list of name value pairs. It won't just add it on to the end of the URL. And the action is where we're going to send the mail to. So for right now, I'm going to say mail to billthomas@isp.com. Now this is where you do mail to and you put the email address of where you want it to send. Mail to, maybe it's your email address at masd.k12.wi.us, whatever it might be. You put that into your actual action. So you should now have your action and your method listed in here. And note, we will always use a mail to for our action. We will always use post for our method. Then from here, you should already have your form tag closed off at the very, very bottom. So that's what you should see added into your program. Then from here, you're going to delete all of the lines between these tags. So I want you to actually go in and I want you to delete that information because we're going to start adding in more specific styling and formatting for the different form input controls that we put in here. So the next video will actually start adding in those input controls now that you've deleted everything inside of your form tags.